lot of my current research projects and research agenda focus on the problem of building state capacity in developing countries. And in particular, thinking about the challenges that developing countries may face in trying to raise revenue to finance public goods, to finance transfer programs, social insurance programs. And so trying to understand what are some of the specific constraints that are really relevant in low-income countries, and what are the potential policy responses? What can these governments do to try to improve their ability to raise fiscal capacity? So for example, in a lot of developed countries, there's been a big focus on one of the major ways in which governments are able to raise revenue is through third-party reporting. So basically the tax authority taking advantage of the fact that it has information about a taxpayer's true financial position from other sources. So for example, why do I not evade on my W-2 income from the Kennedy School? Well, I know that the Kennedy School is reporting that income to the IRS. And so if I report something different, that's going to trigger an audit for sure. And so a recent project in Ecuador raised the question of, well, can you translate that to developing countries, or are there additional constraints that we might worry about? And so this was one project looked at a program in Ecuador where they actually tried to do this with firms, saying, okay, we have this information about revenues from these other sources, and your reported revenues are lower than what we've calculated from third-party sources. Please file an amended tax return. And what we see are two things. First, a number of firms don't respond to these notifications, which is something that we don't often think about in a context like the US. We would sort of assume, look, if you get a notice from the IRS, you're going to respond to that because you know that they're going to follow up if you don't. In a lot of low-capacity countries, taxpayers may just take the risk that they know that tax authorities are understaffed, they know that legal institutions are weak, they know that it might be difficult for the tax authority to follow up, so they simply don't bother to respond. Among the taxpayers that do respond, what we see is that they shift a lot of their misreporting to margins that are harder to observe. So we see taxpayers adjusting their reported revenues to match the tax authority estimates, but also adjusting their reported costs to almost fully offset that increase in reported revenues. And so that illustrates, I think, that some of these challenges that exist in developing countries are important to think about when we look at, can we translate the types of policy instruments that we use in developed countries directly to a developing country context.